Hi, my name is Chewy, and I'm here to inform you about the Macro Unit 2. Let's start off on the 2.1 aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is all the goods and services that buyers are willing and able to purchase at different price levels. You may be asking, hey Chewy, why is aggregate demand downward sloping? Brennan, can you please zoom in? See, there are three key aspects as to why aggregate demand is downward sloping. First key aspect is the real balance effect. There's an increase in price levels which reduces the purchasing power of the dollar. The second key aspect is the interest rate effect. Price level increases, leaders charge more interest rate to get a real profit. This would in turn discourage consumers. The last key aspect is the foreign trade effect. When the U.S. price level increases, foreign buyers purchase fewer U.S. goods. In turn, Americans buy more foreign goods. Exports would decrease, imports would increase, causing real GDP to go down. There are four reasons as how to shift the aggregate demand curve. The first one, as you can see, is the change in consumer spending. The reasons that would make this shift would be consumer wealth, a boom in the stock market, taxes, a decrease in increased taxes, in consumer expectations, or the fear of a recession. The second one is the change in investment spending. Real interest rates, or the price of borrowing money, productivity and technology, and the future business expectations. The third one is the change in government spending, which it would go down in defense spending, national health care, or when there's war around, you need more money to spend for all those troops. And the last reason as to why and how to shift the aggregate demand curve is right here, the change in net exports, or the national income compared to abroad if the United States dollar depreciates relative to the euro. That is 2.1 aggregate demand. Thank you. Come back. Now we're on to Unit 2.2 aggregate supply. Aggregate supply is the amount of goods and services firms will produce in an economy at different price levels. There are two types of aggregate supply. There's one in the short run and one in the long run. In the short run, wages and resource prices will not increase as price levels will also increase. Now in the long run, wages and resource prices will go up as price level goes up as well. If you didn't catch that before, the difference between the two is that resource prices will not increase in the short run. As to long run, it will increase as price level increases as well. There are four shifters. The first shifter of aggregate supply is the change in inflationary expectations. If an increase in aggregate demand leads people to expect higher prices in the future, this in turn increases labor and resource costs. The second one is the resource prices. So, for example, a supply shock, prices of domestic and imported resources, those are two examples of the resource prices. The third one is change in actions of the government, taxes on producers or government regulations change. And the last one is the change in productivity. That would be kind of when new technology like robots or anything along those lines. That is aggregate demand, Macro 2.2. Now we're on the 2.3 aggregate demand and aggregate supply equilibrium. Right here on the left is an inflationary gap. That is when the long run aggregate supply is on the left of the equilibrium point. And the equilibrium point is when the aggregate supply and aggregate demand intersect right here. See, this is when the output is high and the unemployment is less than the NRU. Actual GDP is above the potential GDP. Right here in the middle is the recessionary gap graph. This is when the long run aggregate supply line is to the right of the equilibrium point. And like I said before, the equilibrium point is when the aggregate supply and aggregate demand intersect right there. This is when the output is low and the unemployment is more than the NRU. Actual GDP is below the potential GDP. The last graph for aggregate supply and aggregate demand is the full employment graph. This is where the long run aggregate supply is straight down the middle where the aggregate supply and aggregate demand graph intersect right at the equilibrium point. That is 2.3 aggregate demand aggregate supply equilibrium. Now here's an example onto how to shift the aggregate demand curve. Like I said before, I told you about the four shifters of the aggregate demand. In order to increase aggregate demand, you would have to have good expectations, expansionary policy, low interest rates, or more exports. And in order to shift the aggregate demand to the left, you would have to have bad expectations, contractionary policies, or high interest rates. Now here's an example on how to shift the aggregate demand curve. So let's say the households and firms have high expectations for the future growth. This would increase aggregate demand. So you draw a line right there, and you'd write it as AD1. Now, let's say that the household and firms have a low expectations for the future growth. This would decrease aggregate demand, and you'd draw a line like this, and you'd make it to AD2. And same goes with if the government increases spending or reduces taxes. This would also increase aggregate demand to AD1, from AD to AD1. And also if the government reduces spending or increase taxes, this would decrease aggregate demand from AD to AD2. That is how you shift the aggregate demand curve.
Consumer expectations fall and consumer spending plummets. What happens to price level and output in the short run and long run? Now this is what your assessment should look like.